What if the most important UFO crash in American history wasn't Roswell? Tonight on Truth Be Told, we're diving into a case that predates Roswell by 6 years, an alleged 1941 crash in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, that may have been one of the earliest UFO recoveries in the United States, and one that was quickly buried, covered up, and nearly forgotten. But our guest, Paul Blake Smith, author and researcher behind the UFO Bombshell Before Roswell, he spent years uncovering eyewitnesses, historical records, and shocking connections that suggest this wasn't just a rumor, but a real event involving a crashed craft, mysterious bodies, and a rapid military response. Why has this story stayed in the shadows for so long? What really happened that night in 1941? And could this be the missing piece that changes everything we think we knew about UFO history? Well, let's find out. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, author Paul Blake Smith. All the way from Missouri. How you doing, Paul?
Just fine. Thanks for having me on.
You know, we were talking before. I'm from Kansas, and we used to say misery, huh?
Yeah. Sometimes I do joking. I used to say I'm from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Oh, I mean Missouri, and there was like no laugh from the host, so I don't do that anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you here because your book, The UFO Bombshell Before Roswell, Missouri's 1941 Crash and Cover-Up. Now, like I said, your book claims that a UFO crashed in 1941 in Missouri, which is not too far from where I grew up, and that's 6 years before Roswell. Why has this story kind of stayed under the radar for so long? That still fascinates me.
Oh, it frustrates me because I've got my two most recent books on Nixon and Gleason and their alien encounter, and a book on the Eisenhower encounter under contract with Hollywood producers. When I bring up Cape Girardeau, you're like, well, we'll get back to you on that one. And I just can't get anyone interested in this. It's an amazing story. 6 years before the famous Roswell crash, I'm convinced we had one in a farm field outside of my hometown, where my grandfather was a judge at the time. He had just been talked out of by the family of being city attorney, where he would leave the house at times to go out on criminal cases. Right. So this is the sort of thing he may have gone out that night and been there firsthand had he not switched jobs just beforehand.
Now, Roswell has become this folk legend amongst the UFO. Do you believe the crash in Missouri would be the first documented in the United States?
I would think so, but it was covered up really quick, right from the start, right from that night. And there are reasons why. People would say, well, how could the military arrive on the scene? Cape Girardeau was a National Guard armory town to start with. It's where a young soldier trained in 1906 by the name of Harry S. Truman. He lived in Cape Girardeau for a summer, and he had just campaigned in the Cape Girardeau area 5 months before the crash. And he might have driven right past the area where it came down because he was looking into legislation to turn our local airport into something much bigger and nicer. And many sources have told me that it happened not too far from the airport in a farm field. So he might have been right there. And so there's a lot of amazing stories and research in this that I put in my book, and I think people will find it fascinating. But I'll just mention real quick, President Roosevelt was in charge in those days, and he did not even support Harry S. Truman for re-election in 1940. Wow. He wanted a different candidate.
Wow.
And yet history shows us Roosevelt did a 180 for some reason and picked Truman above all other candidates for the Democratic ticket, knowing that he was ill and probably not going to survive. He almost handpicked the next president of the United States, who I'm convinced had knowledge of the Cape Girardeau crash.
You know, it just realized me. I got my geographic backwards. You're just south of St. Louis. And Cape Girardeau is also known for one of the biggest earthquakes in America, if I'm not for sure.
That's
not mistaken.
Once in a while, the New Madrid Fault Zone does a little shaking and rumbling, and it's still something that can make you nervous when you consider the earthquakes of 1811, 1812. were so powerful they rang church bells in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Boston, Massachusetts, and it did tremendous damage. Only America wasn't nearly as populated then, but we sure are now.
I'm curious. It just popped into my head. If because of that fault line, if I wonder if there's a lot of UFO activity because of something like that. Have you ever thought of that?
It's certainly possible. I've listened to a source who says he is aware of like interdimensional rift in the area
Yeah.
that would allow for the arrival and departure of advanced extraterrestrials. Can't prove that whatsoever,
Right.
but there was like a little Native American who said this has long been part of our lore in
Hmm.
the Cape Girardeau area. That there have been a lot of UFO sightings in farm fields in southeast Missouri, as brought out in a book, a very fine book by Linda L. Wallace, who
Mm.
did some research on the Sikeston, Missouri angle of this case. That's where it's felt that an aerial training program for the U.S. Army Air Corps sent their people up to the crash site that night to take over, abscond with all the evidence, and no notes, no photos, and no metallic debris, and you're to keep quiet for this for the rest of your lives. And in those days, people were very patriotic, and you did what your government told you to do.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I mean, especially back in the day, and I mean, even now, even though we're starting to get a little more openness about it, they still keep it pretty under the wraps.
Yeah,
Well, can we go back to that night on April 1941, and can you kind of walk us through the crash as you understand it, as your research has told you?
sure. The main story, but not the only one,
Right.
comes from the granddaughter of a Cape Girardeau minister named William Huffman. He was at home with his family one late April night, and he got a phone call, and he went out of the house rather abruptly, and he came back to the house later. It must have been close to midnight, 11 o'clock, midnight, and he was all shook up, ashen face, maybe trembling a little bit, and he was really nervous and a little upset. And they asked him, "Where have you been? What's going on?" And he said, "You know that phone call I got? They told me there'd been an airplane crash in a farm outside of town, and I was picked up by a member of, well, an associate of the Cape Girardeau Police Department." And I did a little research and found out that the Cape Girardeau Justice of the Peace, who was associated with the police department, lived right across the street and would have come in an unmarked car, which is exactly what Reverend Huffman said. So here we go. They went 12 or 13 miles out of town in the darkness. It was happened just after sunset. And the person who saw this like a fireball and a fire after the crash had phoned in to the Cape Girardeau Fire Department, which was shared with the police. And he said, "I think a plane has crashed on our property." He had no idea. No one thought about aliens or
Right. Who would have?
extraterrestrials or any sort of, back in 1941, this was not mainstream at all. So they went out there expecting to see an airplane with broken wings and broken fuselage and broken human beings. They expected a gruesome sight, and they wanted to import a pastor who would offer spiritual comfort to not only the victims, but their families when they arrived grieving and upset. And what they found instead in the farm field were the Cape Girardeau Fire Department fighting these flames all around this cracked open circular silver gray disc, a spaceship with no wings, no exhaust, no propellers. It was just a round flying saucer, as we call them these days. So that it was cracked open and people were gathering around to peek inside it. I think they had flashlights and maybe lanterns and car headlights to illuminate the scene, plus the flames that were being stamped out. He said the police department were there, and a man from the media, we'll just say, who was taking big speed graphic photos like you see in the old time movies, these big flashbulb
Right.
pictures that go off. And he was taking those. And people were milling around the craft, which had three small, identical dead aliens laying in the grass. Now, Reverend Huffman said at the very first, "I knelt over one that was still breathing. He was still alive." So he said, "I held it up by the wrist and said some prayers. And when I was, uh, I guess, talking to him or talking to God, the creature went completely limp and just died,
Oh, wow.
expired in front of it." I don't know how wise it was to have touched him, But
Right.
no one was prepared for this situation whatsoever. And he described them as your typical grays: big bulbous head,
Hmm.
big black glassy eyes, just a tiny slit for a mouth, two little dots for nostrils, no ears. They were long limbed and they were soft like rubbery dolls, and the skin was kind of crinkling up. And that would make sense if you were conditioned, maybe created in a laboratory. That's why they were identical, like biorobots, to be inside the interior of a ship and its atmosphere. And once they were exposed to Earth's oxygen rich atmosphere, their skin crinkled and wrinkled, and it was just something that made them even extra creepy and memorable. Well, the Reverend got a peek inside the craft and said he saw maybe a couple of little tiny seats that looked like they were for children.
Hmm.
And there were gauges and dials and a kind of gyroscope, which is for keeping a balance, for whatever vehicle you're in at the time. And he saw a silver band around the top of the interior of the craft, and it had strange hieroglyphic like writing on it, and he
Hmm.
couldn't make it out. So, this is so much like what you hear nowadays
Right.
about the Roswell crash and the strange imprinted symbols and these gray creatures. I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think the Cape Girardeau story is a copycat in any way. But Reverend Huffman said there was a second invasion that night, and that was the Army
Military.
Air Corps came in, or the
Yeah.
military in uniforms, and you are to put down that evidence, get away from those bodies, get away from that ship. This is a matter of national security. You're never to discuss this ever
Hmm.
again. And they were sworn to secrecy. So that rattled everyone pretty good. Cape Girardeau fireman on his deathbed with stage 4 cancer said that the Reverend's story is actually true, that he was there that night. The fireman said we were fighting the flames around this cracked open spaceship, and that he tried to put a little tiny piece of metal, the debris that was in the field, in his pocket. And the military caught him, forced him to give it back, chewed him out, and
Hmm.
kicked him out of the crash site. And that had to have been pretty embarrassing in those days. And the man said, in the aftermath, I felt like I was being watched. My phone was tapped, and
Oh, wow.
people were keeping an eye on me out of town. And I looked into it, and Reverend Huffman said there was also an FBI agent at the scene. I thought at first, well, this is nonsense because we didn't have an FBI office. But a little research shows that the FBI opened a field office in Cape Girardeau 1 month before the crash.
Oh,
There had been
wow.
German farmers and German population in Cape Girardeau was most substantial. A small percentage of them were Bundists or pro-Nazis who were committing sabotage in local factories. So
Oh.
it makes sense that the FBI would go out to what they thought at first was an airplane crash, wondering if there was sabotage in that.
Hmm.
So the story does hang together the more you hear it and the more you research it and the more you read about it. And one woman I talked to has passed away since. Said I was a little 11-year-old girl at the time, and I did not go to the crash site, but I was around these adults, and they were talking excitedly about these little spacemen and their little spaceship that was found in this farm field in the area. And she said, we did not have any term like flying saucer or UFO or extraterrestrial. We just call them little spacemen. And that is another slice of confirmation. She didn't claim to have been to the site and knew everything, but she did remember these conversations that were going on around her. So, one of Cape Girardeau's most famous, probably the most famous personalities, is Rush Limbaugh, the broadcaster. His father was crazy about aviation, and his grandfather was a leading Freemason in town. So Rush was asked on the air, I think in 2007 on his broadcast, Rush, what's up with this Cape Girardeau UFO crash? And Rush would normally just dismiss, get out of here with this junk, this nonsense,
Right.
don't clutter up my show. And instead he said, there's more to this story than you might think. And he moved on to the next caller. So again, I think Rush knew the story. I was told by one person that Rush was told when he was in high school his father was so nuts about aviation, he hung out at the airport with pilots, and he
Wow.
may have learned the lesson or the story there. And his grandfather was like, if we had a Mount Rushmore, Cape Girardeau. Rush's grandfather would be the first one you put on it. He was everywhere, everything. He was in politics and law and community service and a church leader, and he was a very fine man, no matter what you think of politics. Rush, the broadcaster, I never really met, but he was my little league umpire when I was a boy in
Oh,
Cape
okay, that's
Girardeau.
cool. Yeah.
I was pitching, and he was calling. Yeah, he was calling the balls and strikes, and even when I was at the plate. And so he was an obscure radio DJ in those days named Rusty Saw or Rusty Limbaugh on an AM station.
Rusty Limbaugh.
And he went on, he had to find fame and fortune by leaving Cape Girardeau and finding it elsewhere. But, the story has all sorts of little confirmations. My stepmother said, I heard the story back in the 60s in high school, too. And I wish I could remember more, but someone told me about this spaceship that had crashed outside of town some like 25 years earlier. So these people are not prone to lie or fantasy.
Right.
They have nothing to gain, really, and don't make themselves out to be the big hero who knows everything and like, I've got a piece of the debris. There was one man who was from a very reputable Cape Girardeau family, and they were involved in politics as well. And he wrote on Facebook one statement and said, oh, I know all about the crash. A piece of it came down in our yard when I was a kid. And wow. He said that it was a substantial piece and that, it was, this whole thing was covered up, taken away. I tried to get more information from the man, but he was a conservative politician who didn't want to, damage his reputation in any way. So that's another thing. There were a lot of Freemasons in Cape Girardeau, and they keep a lot of secrets. So the mayor was a Knights Templar Freemason who was strangely granted an audience with Vice President Truman and then President Truman three different times. In this obscure Cape Girardeau mayor, there was something going on there. They knew some things, and they could only meet in private to talk about. So there's just all kinds of fascinating aspects to this story, and I tried to cram in as much facts and resources as possible to make sure people get their money's worth when they read my book.
Well, I want to go back. This is great. I've been doing almost 1,100 episodes. I've never interviewed anybody about this crash site, and I'm very excited to hear something new, and I love it. But I do want to go back to the Reverend. I know there was an incident in Brazil that there was a crash. They had a body, or actually a living being, in a hospital, and the doctor said, not with words, with mouth moving, but through telepathy, it spoke to him, and it was very kind. It was very loving. I'm curious if the Reverend spoke about anything of the one that was dying, if he had any visions or words that come from this being. Did that happen at all?
I get that question a lot, and from what I'm told, he did not say that there was any communication at all. Now, he may have had some and didn't tell his family,
right?
Or the family kept that part covered up. But the answer, from what I understand, is no. Two of the bodies were dead, and the third one was just barely alive and expired right in front of him after a brief period. So there was a very little opportunity. There's another aspect of the story we should discuss, and that's that the cameraman with the big speed graphic put that away. But two men lifted up one of the dead aliens under the arms and posed him. And so the cameraman pulled out a small Brownie camera and snapped a picture and walked away. Now, in Cape Girardeau, there's a relative of mine, kind of a distant relative, named Garland Fronebarger, who was a photographer reporter for the local newspaper. He was known as One Shot Frone because he kept taking one picture and walking away. He was kind of a cheapskate. He didn't like spending money on film, even though you've got the most amazing story.
Right. Oh, my God. That would be
Well, he took plenty of pictures with the speed graphic camera. But to his chagrin, the military took that away and took all his film. But he hid the little brownie camera in his pocket, and Reverend Huffman said a few weeks after the crash, that photographer knew he was there, Reverend Huffman, and went to his house in Cape Girardeau and handed him a copy of this image of the alien being propped up by two local men
Where's that at?
under its flopping arms. Yeah. Said, I want you to have a copy of this. I have a copy, and I want you to have a copy. And I'm wondering if anyone else out there has a copy. It has never surfaced. You see little recreations online. You can look that up, but that's not the actual photograph. The Reverend said, we kept it in the family for a number of years. The granddaughter said, I saw this picture at family parties. They wouldn't tell me much about it, but I saw it. And she said it was exactly as described, a big bulbous head, black eyes, crinkly skin, creepy looking, and that it was stolen, taken away by a family friend, some friend, in the early 1950s. And when confronted many decades later, he was an old man, he kept denying it. And then he said, yeah, I took it, but I gave it back. Or he kept changing his story. And then he passed away in 2012, I think it was. So that man had an Army intelligence background, and
Oh,
he was accustomed to hanging around the White House. He later became like a UPI or Associated Press photographer at the White House and was stationed in Washington, D.C. So, some strange stuff going on here. And each aspect of this story is so fascinating. We've got to get Hollywood to make at least a documentary, if
I
not
know, that
a
would be
full-length
amazing.
movie.
Now,
Yeah.
the bodies, were they already outside of the craft?
Yes.
Okay.
Reverend Huffman apparently heard someone say that the bodies were pulled out by the farmhand who probably saw the crash firsthand and called it in.
Right.
So they were pulled from the craft, which may have been the worst thing for them to
Right.
expose them to our atmosphere
Right.
and lay them out on the ground. They may have been dead already, who knows? So there's no apparent cause of the crash, pilot error, mechanical error. They were caught up in some of the shelling, maybe across the globe in World War II, that America had not quite entered as of April 41. We would not enter the war until December 7th, Pearl Harbor attack. But FDR was very nervous. He thought we were going to be attacked by the Nazis
Mm-hmm.
at almost any moment, practically, in the spring of 41. And so the word came from Washington. Do not let this, story out. Apparently, the leader of the Sykeston Aerial Corps, who arrived at the scene, used to work in Washington at the War Department. So he probably placed a quick call, and they said, cover it up, keep it clamped down, and get all the evidence, scoop it up, and get it out of there. And that's what they did that night.
So I know in Roswell they did publish in the paper about, which I'm surprised it did, but in Cape Girardeau, did they get anything in the paper? Because I don't care how many people the military going, don't you tell anybody, people,
Yeah.
as they did, they're going to tell people. So what happened when it comes to the newsworthy at all, at least locally?
A few people did talk in Cape Girardeau, but not many. They were worried because it's a National Guard armory town where citizens were also soldiers.
Got
And
it.
there was,
Okay.
according to Reverend Huffman, an air of fear in the aftermath. That if you say anything, we're so scared. They chewed us out, lectured us not
Got
to
it.
talk. And the story did not appear in the papers. I've investigated them thoroughly. However, in my book, I have put in how there was a bomber airplane circling Cape Girardeau on the morning of April 25th, a Friday morning. And it kept circling around and around, and people thought, are we going to be bombed? And I think
Yeah.
those who reported the story had no idea about the crash possibly the night before, because the military obviously would be looking around. What else is laying around? They had to look, a B 52 or B 17 bomb or something like that would have extensive aerial photography and focus cameras attached, and they could see down below. And so they were circling around the town and making people very nervous, and that made the papers. So I find that a small smoking gun that you could say this was the morning after, and then it
Mm-hmm.
might have happened Thursday night, April 24th.
Wow. Wow. I'm sure people have asked you, and at least I'm sure many want to know, and you weren't there, so you probably don't know, but somebody might have suggested about why do you think this crash happened? Was it shot down? Was it a stormy night? Was it...
Yeah. Any possibility I'm open to listening to. One woman contacted me on Twitter and gave me just a few sentences. I want to know more, but she was not responsive. She said, my grandmother saw the craft flying overhead on her farm and it was emitting sparks. It was kind of low in the sky and it looked like it was in trouble. So it wasn't maybe just a sudden lightning strike. Well, I suppose it could have been. That's another factor. But it managed to limp along until it came to a rest in a farm field just outside Cape Girardeau. And if I knew the exact site, I would not tell you because these farms are people's businesses
Yeah.
and their homes, and they're not fenced in at all. You just would be traipsing all over
Yeah.
private property. And I thought about looking myself, but I don't want to A, get shot at, and B, I was warned a number of times. We got a lot of big rattlesnakes and copperheads in those fields looking for
That's
little
all you would
babies.
have to say to me.
Yeah, that's enough for me. They said you better wear tough, thick boots, and no, I think I'll stay out and not get arrested, shot at, or bitten. Thank you.
I'd rather have the gun than the snakes. Do you think? Right? Do you believe that
Indiana Jones all over again.
that would be me? I could do a lot of things, but snakes and heights are
Why
not
does it
my
have to
thing.
be snakes? Yeah.
Snakes and heights are not my thing. Do you believe this is this was extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or something entirely different?
That it was a physical craft makes it seem like it could have come from another planet, but not in our solar system. I don't think there's any sign of life in our solar system, but the Milky Way is enormous and it's just one of a zillion other galaxies full of life. And I think many have some forms of life on them and advanced enough, a few, to master space travel and to come here and poke around. I liken it to scientists here on Earth, let's say in America, flying to Africa, studying the jungle or a swamp and taking specimens, taking maybe some animals, and coming back to a lab in America and writing up a report. It could have been something like that. Missouri farm country is big cattle country, and we've heard a lot about in this country cattle mutilations, which is a most
Yeah.
unpleasant
I was going to
subject,
ask
but
you about that.
it
Yeah.
would have been, yeah. We had very fertile grass, and we had lots of grazing animals, horses and cows and such. In my research, I could not find any news stories of any cattle mutilations, but I'm not sure if that would have made the news back in the late
Probably
30s
not.
and 40s.
We probably just said probably a coyote or something.
Mm-hmm.
Since this was before Pearl Harbor, I was born not the year of of course, but I was born the day of Pearl Harbor, Sunday, December 7th. But this is before the actual attack on Pearl Harbor. So we weren't involved in the war yet. And like you said, people were probably expecting we probably would get attacked at some point. Do you feel it motivated to keep it quiet because of the potential of World War in America, or was it seem like it was happened before? Because the way they came in and the way they keep things quiet, it seems like this has happened before. What is your thoughts on that?
All right, here we go. David Grush is a local, or not a local, but a national whistleblower who says the evidence that he's seen is that a UFO crashed in Italy in 1933. Mussolini's forces moved in, took it over, and established great secrecy. And they even jailed some people who were talking
Wow.
and kept it out of the papers. So that leaked to the Vatican, and the Vatican had a spokesman who leaked to FDR, according to David Grush and these other people who are looking into this amazing story. So in 1933, Roosevelt would have known about the story leading up to Cape Girardeau and would have probably have thought about this secrecy, when in doubt, cover it up, and issued the same sort of policy. And again, there were a lot of German people in Cape Girardeau. We had so many Germans in those days. We had a Lutheran church that did their service in German, the
Oh,
German language, with
wow.
German songs. Yeah. So, being very nervous about pro Bundes and saboteurs that were already in the area, this would be cause to cover it up quick.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, being from Kansas in the 70s, we used to see a lot of UFO activity, and even in fact
Wow.
my mom, my sisters, I had two sisters at the time, and a brother and myself. I was young. I was really young. I don't remember it. They do. My mom's passed away, but even probably 2 months before she passed away 8 years ago, we talked about it, about seeing a craft over a lake, nothing, no noise, and even a small prop plane turned around and came back to, I think they saw something and turned around, and then like this, like my picture behind me, took off. It just went up and took off. Was there a lot of activity? Because you said there was a bomber that flew over, but was there a lot of activity at that time and since that you know of around Cape Girardeau?
Not really militarily. The bomber plane was, I tracked down a follow-up story that appeared in the paper, was sent from what is now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base,
Mm-hmm.
our Air Force headquarters. So they just happened to have sent a plane out to circle around Cape Girardeau
Very
and turn
interesting.
around and go home. That's the official story. They were just on a test flight, just happened to be in the neighborhood. And it's so phony. That was probably, as I say, the day after. But occasionally there were some military like people doing training. Harry S. Truman trained down by the
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi River in scaling the cliffs to prepare him for what became World War One. And so that's an example how there were military folks in the area, and there was, according to Reverend Huffman, some military men in uniform when he arrived before the official takeover by the troops that arrived by trucks.
Oh, so military was
So
already
that,
there.
yeah,
Oh,
he
wow.
said there was a few. And this makes sense that the sheriff of Cape Girardeau County was the brother of the
Oh,
Air Corps training program in Sykeston's executive, one of the executives of the program.
wow.
So all it took was a quick phone call. They may have thought at first, looks like one of your planes went down. You
Yeah.
better get up here. And they may have made a follow-up call. This is not an airplane. This is probably going to be a military matter. We need you to come in and take over this site.
Wow.
That's my speculation. It all hangs together why the military could show up within the hour of Reverend Huffman being there. And he arrived, and there were all these people there.
Hmm.
So I've talked to a number of people who barely had a little hint of the story. The problem for me is it was so long ago, everyone's deceased, and in
Right.
many cases, their children are deceased.
Yeah.
And a few have grandchildren still around who haven't heard the story, or they've just barely heard it, like even through television. So the
Mm-hmm.
story is dying out. I assembled as much as I could, and I wish it had a really wonderful, happy ending. I wish someone would send me like a diary or some photographs or film. But seeing how American scientists are just disappearing and being unalived
Right.
with what they know, maybe it's for the best. I don't have any hard, tangible proof. I feel fine. I'm not feeling suicidal.
Yeah, right. Oh, man. Out here, because I'm in California, so, we have Area 51 in Nevada. So what have you heard of where the craft and the bodies were taken? Was there any type of bunker or any type of base that they were really restricted of people even getting close to it after the fact?
This is a fuzzy area, but I feel from what I collected that the craft and the bodies were scooped up and hauled down to the Sykeston, Missouri airport where they had the training program, and
Mm,
it might have stayed for a day or two at most.
right.
I think they were under orders to fly east, possibly to Wright-Patterson, but then it was countermanded, I'm pretty sure. there are two witnesses who spoke of seeing metallic spaceship debris and three bodies in three glass jars in a special storeroom under the U.S. Capitol building. One
Wow.
was a cousin of Cordell Hull, FDR's Secretary of State. And he said, Cordell took me under the Capitol, like 6 or 7 stories down. I said, where are we going? And he said, just, be patient. We'll get there and don't talk about this. So he led him into this storeroom. And sure enough, there were these boxes of metal debris. And he said, this was a spaceship that we think it will touch off a panic. So we're not to talk about this. And across the room, here are these three glass jars of what he said were like alien beings scrunched in there, floating in what he thought was formaldehyde, some sort of fluid to preserve them, with big bulbous heads and black eyes and long, skinny arms and legs. Apparently, uh, 3 fingers and a thumb per hand, and that creepy gray skin. And a man called me a few years ago on New Year's Eve to tell me that he was a little boy and being rewarded after the last day of school by his father, who worked for the FDR administration. And they went on the train that runs under the Capitol. They got out and went under the Capitol down several stories to this special storeroom. And he saw three glass jars, three dead aliens, and all this strange metal debris. He said, my father wouldn't tell me what it is. He would just show me this and say, this looks like some sort of storeroom. And you knew that the dad knew about this. He knew where to look. And it turns out his father was a good close friend of Cordell Hull,
Oh, wow.
who was, again, Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of State for many years.
Wow.
So it's a little piece of trivia. Cordell Hull was buried underground under a church in Washington, D.C., in a crypt, like in a vault down below the building. Kind of like these dead alien bodies. It's just so strange, all these various aspects of this tale.
Given many records from the 1940s are missing or they were destroyed, how did you reconstruct this case? Since a lot of people are gone and records are gone, how did you reconstruct this?
I'll put in a plug for Ryan S. Wood and his website, majesticdocuments.com, which has a number of almost shocking documents from the federal government that have leaked and been acquired by people who, in some cases, worked for the government and held on to them. And some of them refer in the 40s to a crash. There was a 1947 summary report of what crashed in Roswell. And then there's a statement in it by General Nathan Twining. And he says, we deemed the 1947 crash to be extraterrestrial in nature in comparison to the 1941 discovery in Missouri.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's like, well, bingo, there's another confirmation. FDR wrote a couple of memos that have leaked, and he talked about these celestial wonders that have come to us. And
Wow.
for some reason, FDR formed a non-terrestrial science and technology committee. Gee, what a coincidence in the aftermath of this crash. So those documents, I think, are probably real. In some cases, they were photos or photocopies, and others were directly sent to some people who collect these sort of things, but they had to be retyped. They were a little messy. But this 1947 one is just like a blockbuster talking, and they mention a second time the Missouri discovery of 1941. So, what else could possibly be
Yeah.
that came out of the sky in 41 that was deemed extraterrestrial?
Well, for the people out there that haven't heard about this or want to learn more about it, you can pick up Paul's book, The UFO Bombshell Before Roswell, Missouri's 1941 Crash and Cover-Up, on his website, paulblakesmith.com. The book is published. It's coming out actually. In June?
July 6th. From Llewellyn Publishing and Amazon.com.
So it's coming up for this summer. So hopefully you guys can pre-order. And even though the book is published, are there still trinkets coming in and people still talking, opening up about this case to you?
A little bit. I hear, there are references in the media now and then. And I used to get what I would mention like grandchild my grandmother told me this, my grandfather told me
Yeah.
this, my mom told me this just before she passed away. One of them was from a grandmother who talked to the woman who married the guy who was the farmhand who called in the
Right.
story. And, it gets to be second and third hand, but it's still what they relate fits together quite nicely.
I have to say, a lot of things get passed down, trinkets that people don't even know that they have in their possessions from their grandparents or great grandparents or even
Like,
parents.
what is this that grandpa left us?
Yeah, I mean, my father and mother, my father passed away a few months ago, and just finding things that never knew he had. It's so I encourage people that if they do live around an area or even somewhere that they think may not be worth giving to someone like Paul, but it's always good to look through everything to make sure it might be a value of something, a case like this. So I'm excited to have you on the show and talk about this. I really appreciate it, Paul.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, and the book is fun if in this sort of paranormal, mysterious way because it's truth. You can make up all kinds of wacky UFO stories in fiction, but I always find truth is stranger and much more interesting than fictional stories. But I'm trying to get Hollywood interested and, get this on either the big screen or the small screen. So we'll see what happens.
But thank you, Paul, and we hope that you keep in touch. I know you have another amazing books that you have written that you can just go to the website, go to Amazon, purchase books, and support people like this that go out and do the work that we don't do.
I will say that this book I wrote in 2016, and it was featured the cover on the History Channel, Ancient Aliens. But it's got a few mistakes in it. I admit it. I'm correcting those mistakes and adding to the story. And the son of the publisher of the book assured me he would not be selling it, and he is, and he's keeping all the money. So he's. I have to urge people: don't buy this book because I got a new one coming out. It's much better, and the money actually goes to me instead of a crook.
Oh, yeah, we don't want that. And even though somebody has, you said there's some incorrections. I remember interviewing Eric Van Daniken, who we just lost not too long ago, several times. And he said, Chariots of the Gods, there's some things that changed and things that he was wrong about, and he admitted it. So
Yeah.
it's that's what research is for.
It's a little embarrassing, but I'm going to, man up and admit I made a mistake. Let's say my original book, I thought it happened April 12th. Well, I've moved off of that date, and I'm sorry. I hope I didn't mislead anyone. And I want to make clear that there's a second date now I'm much more focused on, but that doesn't mean it's absolute either. And a few other little tidbits that I needed to clean up. And I'm going to do that, take responsibility. We all make mistakes.
We all make mistakes.
So this new book will be much better. It'll be worth your money, I assure you. And hopefully it'll catch on where someone of influence will get it on a bigger stage.
Perfect. Well, we appreciate you, and we want to support you. And go to paulblakesmith.com. And you can pick up his books and support him any way that we can. So, but Paul, thank you, and take care of yourself, and keep up the good work. Keep writing, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show.
All righty, I'll continue my work on President Reagan's Close Encounters, my next book.
Let's do it. All right, thank you everybody
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Truth Be Told every Friday right here on the Club Paranormal Network channel on YouTube. Please subscribe. Go to Apple, Spotify. Do your subscriptions there. Leave comments and give us a 5-star. We love that. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other.